Shrink Wrap Radio number 716, the Shrink Wrap Radio 15th Anniversary Celebration Show.
It's Shrink Wrap Radio. All the psychology you need to know and just enough to make it dangerous. It's all in your head. And now here's your host, Dr. Dave.
August 22nd, 2020 marked the 15th anniversary of Shrink Wrap Radio. I would not have known this had not devoted fan of the show and Iranian friend Mahyar Alinaghi let me know and insisted there be some sort of formal recognition of this milestone. I invited listeners and past guests to send or record brief greetings, and I invited frequent past guest UK Professor Kahr to help me celebrate the event and also to discuss his latest book, Dangerous Lunatics, Trauma, Criminality, and Forensic Psychotherapy. For more information about Professor Kahr, please see our show notes at shrinkwrapradio.com. Now, here's the show. Professor Kahr, welcome back to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Hello, David. Lovely to be back on your program, and happy 15th birthday to you.
15th, 1-5. It's 1-5, 15th anniversary, and I believe this is your 6th appearance on the show.
Good gracious.
Yeah.
What an honor and privilege to be back on your program and on such a special anniversary occasion. You must be very, very proud of yourself, very pleased that you've kept Shrink Wrap Radio going for such a long time.
Yeah, I've gotten so into the groove with it that I wasn't keeping track. And, first of all, we're getting back to having you here. After so many appearances, you're now an old friend of the show as well as a very vocal fan of the show in the past. So I thought, who better to accompany me in this show adventure anniversary with me here. And our mutual friend in Tehran, Mahyar, I know how to say his name, Mahyar Alinaghi, let me know that August 22nd was the official date of this milestone. Now, I wasn't paying attention, so that's already come and gone. And he was also the person who some years ago insisted that I must have you on the show for our first interview. So he also gets credit for bringing us together and also makes you a perfect co-host, as I say, for today.
Well, he's a very good man, our friend from Iran, and a very, very good historian to have remembered the anniversary date.
Really, really. From one historian to another, because you're a very good historian as well. Well, in addition, I want to make sure that we save some time after our celebration to discuss one of your latest books, Dangerous Lunatics, Trauma, Criminality, and Forensic Psychotherapy. I'm not sure how good a marriage that is with the first part. It seems to be very different thing there. But I thought, to begin the celebration, I did put out a couple of times on a couple of shows. I announced that communications from either audience members or past guests would be, past guests were invited. And so I think we have about 6 texts and 6 audio files. And I thought it would be fun if you would read the texts. I'll play the audios. And you do one, I'll do one, you do one, I'll do one. And so we'll go through all 12 that way. How does that sound?
Sounds like a very good idea, and you do deserve some tributes. And we mustn't forget you've already won a huge tribute from the American Psychological Association for your contribution to public education in psychological matters.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that, I must say. And I think in the course of this show here, my head's going to get so large that it may explode.
Oh.
Not that I'm at all attached to all of this praise.
well, you deserve the tribute. Shrink Rap Radio has made an enormous contribution. And I must say that I've particularly enjoyed listening to the podcasts during lockdown when we've not been able to lead our more normal lives. So I think I've listened to more podcasts in the last 6 months than ever before.
Oh, I can imagine.
It's been a wonderful education to go through all the episodes, and I think one of the features that I love so much about Shrink Rap Radio is that you are in no way prejudicial. You're not sectarian in terms of how you approach psychology. You welcome people from all different backgrounds and all different clinical and theoretical orientations, and everybody has something to teach us. And I think you've been very embracing and welcoming of the whole mental health community in that regard.
Well, thank you. And that was really, I didn't have much in the way of goals or plans when I began to do this, except that. That's what I set out to do, was to be as welcoming to as many approaches as possible. So, so it's great to have succeeded in doing that. And
yes, you really have, because we do, I think because those of us who work as mental health clinicians of one sort or another, often we're trapped in our own little bubbles.
Yeah.
And we don't get out as much as we might like. So Freudians don't necessarily talk to cognitive behavioral people, and cognitive behavioral people don't necessarily hang out with Jungians. We do live in our own tiny little communities,
right? And
we often jump to conclusions about what other colleagues are like. And I think you've very much helped with the breadth and the depth of the range of your guests, helped us to come to know one another better.
I'm so glad to hear that, and certainly I've learned a lot in the process myself. Sometimes, having guests who are coming from what for me was a far corner of the psychological, psychotherapeutic world, and so I learned in the process as well. And if my brain were not aging, I would be really, really bright, having heard all of this. But I'm afraid it doesn't all stick. And I've reached the point now, with having done close to 1,000 interviews, if I include the ones that I did with the Wise Counsel podcast series, that it sometimes happens that somebody will ask me if I interviewed so-and-so, and I'm not quite sure, did I talk to that person or not? So I have to look back. That
is extraordinary to have done 1,000 interviews.
Well, I'm not quite there. I think I figured out that I'll have to keep going for another, I think it's either 3 or 5 years, because if I do one a week, and so this one is number 716, I believe.
Gosh.
And so to get to 1,000, I can only do 50 a year. So we'll see.
Well, we shall hold you to it. We look forward to that.
Okay, we'll see how it goes. Well, why don't you kick things off by reading the first email greeting that we received?
Well, it is so lovely how many colleagues have written in with really lovely, loving announcements, and people from all over the world. Here is a message that we've received from Dr. Dale Ironson, who says, "Dear Dr. Dave, I just wanted to congratulate you on the 15th anniversary of your award-winning podcast, Shrink Rap Radio. From the very start 15 years ago, before anyone knew what a podcast was, you created an amazingly interesting, insightful, and useful show that captures both the substance and inspiration of the field of psychology for both students and people interested in psychology worldwide." Dr. Aronson then goes on to say, "Your skill as an interviewer and the humor, humanity, wisdom, and the personal touch that you bring to each show is what has made Shrink Rap Radio stand out as both valuable and unique. and well deserving of all the awards and recognition that you and your show have received. It's been a privilege to see you and your work evolve over the years, and I hope that there are many more great years and great shows to come. Keep on trucking Dr. Dave. Love and best wishes, Dr. Dale Ironson. Isn't that lovely?
Yes, it is lovely, and I'm really glad that I invited you to read these because I knew you would be such a good reader, and actually he's been a good friend for many years, and I actually was on his doctoral committee many years ago.
No kidding! Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
wow!
And we've stayed good friends all these years. So I had to give
obviously
him
a great admirer of yours.
Yeah, to give him a chance to get his licks in here as well. Well, let me give you a audio, and I hope everybody will be able to hear it okay. This is from Al Tabor, who is a financial supporter of the show, somebody who makes regular contributions, and has been a long-time listener. And really glad to hear from Al. And here it comes.
Hi, Dave. Al Tabor here. I've been a listener since I heard you on whatever that weird Are You Serious podcast was many, many years ago. Congratulations. I've listened to all your podcasts, and they never fail to be interesting and frequently life-changing. So happy birthday.
So were you able to hear that okay?
Yes, absolutely. What another kindly tribute to you. Lovely.
Yeah.
And nice that people have both written in and sent you special audio recordings. Yeah.
And he's a deep thinker, I must say. He turned me on to a publication medium called Medium, an online publication. And he's written some essays there integrating psychotherapeutic ideas and struggling with some of Jung's concepts and in very articulate ways. And he also, I don't want to embarrass him, he may hear this at some point, he made his mark in the world of business and was a founder or co-founder of a very successful business that many people would recognize the name of, but I'm not going to put it out here since I didn't discuss this with him. But I'm so glad to have him be such a devoted listener. He says he's heard them all. I don't know if he's heard them all, but anybody who's actually listened to all of them, my hat is off to you. You got another email for us?
Yes, we have no shortage of lovely statements. Here is a comment, a brief comment from Gary Bobroff, the founder of JungianOnline.com, who says, Dr. Dave brings a curious mind and an open heart to exploring the wonders of the psyche. He's brought cutting-edge ideas from new authors out in the world and served his listeners so well. His 15-year run on Shrink Wrap Radio is to be celebrated. Thank you, Dr. Dave.
Very nice, very nice. Yes, Gary Bobroff, he's been a guest on the show, I think twice. And yeah, so wonderful. Here's another one, another voicemail. And this one is from John Fredrickson, who's written some wonderful books. He's been a guest maybe 3 or 4 times, maybe 3. Mm-hmm. He's going to be one again because he's got another new book that he's let me know about. And so here's Dr. John. Actually, he's a social worker. So not doctor, but very, very smart. He should have doctor in there somewhere.
Hi, David. I just wanted to wish your program a happy birthday. Thank you so much for your program. The range of people you bring on, the subjects you discuss, and the quality of questions you ask are just create a fantastic forum for spreading new knowledge and new techniques and new understandings in the field of psychotherapy. It's a format unlike any other, and we're eternally in your debt. So thank you so much for presenting such a great program for so many years. Best wishes, and happy birthday.
Okay, thank you, Dr. John Fredrickson. Go ahead. Let's hear another text.
You've provoked tributes not only from people from America, but from many countries besides. And here is a tribute from someone called Thais, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I hope I am. Thais from Denmark, who has written, "Dear Dr. Dave, here is an email to wish Shrink Rap Radio a happy 15th anniversary. A lot has happened since we last spoke, but one thing has not changed: my love for psychology and for Shrink Rap Radio." Thais then writes, "I have to this date listened to 261 episodes, still counting. My wish, as difficult as it may sound, is to one day have listened to all Shrink Rap Radio episodes. It might take me years, but it is so worth it. This podcast, as I am not sure you remember, got me out of some really dark places, and it warms my heart every time I listen to your voice, because that means I am about to listen to a very high quality and interesting show. Thank you for your amazing work, and happy 15th Shrink Rap Radio anniversary."
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. You know, we mentioned Mahyar Alinaghi earlier, and he's actually the one who brought her in. I assumed she was from Iran, since I didn't know how to pronounce her name either, and only subsequently discovered that she is currently living in Denmark.
In Denmark, yeah.
But actually is from somewhere else, as I recall, maybe somewhere in South America. So it's a very international.
But you've gone international, you know, with a very American-sounding name like Shrink Rap Radio, because, you know, certainly here in the United Kingdom, people don't tend to use the word shrink as a colloquialism as much as in America.
Yeah.
But obviously, you're reaching, you know, many countries. I don't even know if you know the full range of listeners that you have worldwide.
I don't, not really.
It's probably enormous. We've already got the States and the United Kingdom and Denmark and some more countries to come.
Yeah, actually, I do have a way of getting some idea. I use a service that tracks some of these things, and they report that it's over 200. It's about 215 countries represented.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's quite something. That's really quite something.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Here's another audio for us all. And this one is from Leanne Whitney, a Jungian.
Dr. Dave, this is Dr. Leanne Whitney calling to wish you a happy 15th anniversary. And also thank you so much for all you have contributed to our world in regards to the science of psychology and its application. Bravo. Once again, happy anniversary, Dave. Looking forward to listening to many more episodes to come.
So,
Dear David, this is Steve.
Wait a second. I skipped your turn. Leanne, interestingly, started out as, I think, in theater. I think she was been an actress in some theater productions, and also became a film producer, and has a film or two out there that she has done.
How very interesting. One can tell from the quality of her speaking voice that she has a really good outreach. She speaks with a rich and full musical voice, so that's useful to hear.
Yeah. Okay, what's the next email?
And now from Patricia Brannigan from nearby in Toronto, Canada, who says, "A very, very happy birthday, Dr. Dave. I am so grateful for the existence of Shrink Rap Radio. May there be many more birthdays."
Lovely, lovely. Okay, and here comes one from Stephen Post, who is a recent guest. We had a marvelous connection, and maybe not too surprisingly, because he's the director of something called the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. And so we had a lot of love going back and forth in our recent interview. So here's Dr. Stephen Post.
Dear David, this is Stephen Post thanking you for the wisdom, the happiness, the resilience that you have spread over 15 wonderful years with Shrink Wrap Radio. May all of this shine back on you on this wonderful birthday. You've given so much, and we who have been inspired by your programs, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts and minds. You keep us all eager to learn and to grow, to be open to all kinds of surprises. It's hard for me to believe that 13 years ago we did a show together, and now we've just done a second one that was even more enjoyable, if that could be possible. You have a fabulous gift for bringing out the best in people. You are a stable point of light, focusing healing love on all those around you, on humankind, and on all those who struggle to find meaning in a chaotic time. Thank you for being there to help us all believe in the beauty of our dreams. Cheers galore, Stephen.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
what touching tributes.
I know.
You know, and all spoken with such affection and sincerity. You really have reached people's hearts with your podcasts.
Well, I think I'm going to hang on to all of this, and maybe the next time I'm feeling down, I'll play all of this again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You are entitled to.
Yeah. Okay, let's have another shot across the bow here.
Now, here we have a tribute from a woman with whom I have enjoyed some correspondence. She's based here in the United Kingdom, although unfortunately I haven't met her in person, but she writes the most wonderful, interesting blogs on your website.
Oh, yes.
Isabella Clarke. And Isabella Clarke says, the work that he has done for all of us has, I am absolutely certain, enhanced the lives of many people. And when I think about the intuitions, instincts, and insights that I would like societies to be rich in, indeed, when I think of the intuitions, instincts, and insights that I wish those in power possessed, I don't have to look far to find them. Dr. Dave, thank you. From the bottom of my heart to the front of my prefrontal cortex, Izzy Clarke.
Yeah,
that's charming, really charming.
She was good. Okay, and here comes one from Rob Canora, a longtime listener.
Hi, Dr. Dave. It's Rob Canora again. I was so excited about your episode on Jung Patanjali, I forgot the most important part. Congratulate you on your 15th anniversary and underline what a great contribution you have made and continue to make to the understanding of all things psychology for regular folk like me, as well as for professionals. What a fine retirement tribute to a long career. No wonder you've been awarded the APA Presidential Award. And as important as all that is, the real important part of my message is, yes, I've been a monthly contributor for years, and I intend to keep that up, and I certainly encourage all your other listeners to make whatever contribution they can afford during these challenging times in support of your great efforts. Take care and enjoy your anniversary.
Well, even got an ad in there.
Absolutely. Well, I hope people who are long-standing listeners would feel inclined to make a contribution, because you've been very, very generous in putting this together with your own time, your own cost, and really sharing so much psychological knowledge over a whole decade and a half. That's really special.
Yeah.
I have one more tribute here, and this one comes from our mutual colleague, Mahyar Alinaghi, who is in Tehran. And as I don't need to tell you, David, this young man, I don't think he's even 30 years old yet, a real youngster, but he's making very, very blue sky contributions to the development of the psychoanalytical community in Iran, and translating books from English into Farsi, working in clinics and helping to teach there. So he really has I think taken some of the jewels of shrink wrap radio, and he is applying them on the cold front.
Definitely.
And he has written, "Dear Dr. Dave, please accept my heartfelt congratulations on this very happy occasion of the 15th anniversary of Shrink Wrap Radio. I am quite at a loss to thank you for all you have done throughout these years, and I may not abuse this opportunity to describe how important Shrink Wrap Radio has been in my life on a deeply personal level. I shall just suffice to say that your interviews became my only way to contact an external world of vivid ideas of different tastes and sounds and smells, and has made me feel like a child who is discovering the universe for the very first time, touching the hot sands of the sea, experiencing the blow of cold mountain wind on its face, smelling the rain in the dense forest, and tasting the taste of sour cherries for the first time. Not much in the world has had such an effect on my mind and heart for such a long time, and this leaves me no way but to attribute all this to your liveliness, your dynamic personality, your genuine open-mindedness, and your authentic generosity in sharing all this with your audience, of whom I am a proud member. The first day I sent you an email over a decade ago, I never imagined that I would find a friend on the other side of the world who would mean the world to me. And today I am very happy to celebrate 15 years of Shrink Wrap Radio with you from all the way in Iran. May Shrink Wrap Radio thrive and flourish for years and years to come. Warmly, Mahyar Alinaghi."
Wow. You know, that brings a tear to my eye, and we truly have become friends. And
and he writes like a poet, don't you think?
I was struck by that as you were reading it. I'm so glad that you read it. And sometimes I've you know, the amazing thing is all of his English has been self-taught by, you know, from the media, from internet and so on. And he's so articulate. And yeah, and I can't help but wonder what it would be like if only I understood Farsi. And I'm sure my appreciation for him would only deepen, because, you know, I think it's hard to render your fullest self, you know, in a second language.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, he's a very, very special colleague, and I look forward to what he's going to do and has already begun to do for his country.
Yes. And one more audio here, keeping the international theme alive. This is from a child psychiatrist who I've had the opportunity to meet in person. He's Canadian, and he was down here for a workshop, and so we got together and met. Dr. Michael O'Connor.
Hello, Dr. Dave. This is Michael O'Connor. I wanted to wish you a happy 15th birthday on Shrink Wrap Radio. I'm so happy to have been with you over many of these years, and I just listened to your podcast with Stephen Post on synchronicities. I don't think this is a random coincidence today, because I was really, really moved by that show. It speaks a lot to me about how we've been connected over these years and how your show has really shaped me. I wouldn't be the same person today that I am without the show, and really helped lead the way for me on quite a journey in my development. So I want to thank you for all the work and happy birthday.
Wow.
Lovely.
Yeah. So it's wonderful to get all of these greetings, and I want to thank everybody who contributed to this, and to you as well. And this would be a good chance for us to discuss your latest book here. So I've actually got the book in my hand as well. Dangerous Lunatics, Trauma, Criminality, and Forensic Psychotherapy. And one of the things that I learned from this was that the dangerous lunatics, just sounds like something that would be kind of colloquial, but it was actually, of course, there was no DSM way back in the day, no official set of diagnoses, but it was kind of widely used, evidently, when medical people, psychiatrists, alienists, as they were known then, spoke about violent patients.
Yes, absolutely correct, David. This is really a book about the history of how we have treated violent people who suffer from extreme mental illness across the ages. And you're absolutely right. Had you or I been practicing 150 years ago, we would not have talked about the people who came to see us as clients or, customers or consumers or even patients. We would have used an official term, which would have been dangerous lunatics. All mentally ill patients, all psychiatric patients were referred to in the mid-19th century as lunatics. And as you know, that phrase continued even into the 20th century. But there was a special subcategory of those lunatics who committed violent crimes, whether it was rape, arson, sexual assault, or murder. And they would be known as dangerous lunatics, and most of them were treated in really grotesquely inhumane ways, chained to the walls of their institutions, beaten. The notion of what we call now therapy, the talking therapies, where we ask people how they're feeling and take
right.
a detailed history of their childhood, that was completely unknown in the mid-19th century. So this book is really an attempt to expose the very cruel way with which our professional predecessors treated and one might go so far as to say abused their patients.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the first chapter of the book is titled Torture and Execution, Ancient Remedies for Perpetrators. And
yes.
You describe some of, even going as far as amputation. And you talk about the Code of Hammurabi, which goes back, which culture does that hail from, Hammurabi?
Well, Hammurabi, many will be familiar with the so-called Hammurabi Code, as it's known in the English language. He was the king of ancient Babylonia back in the 18th century BCE, a very, very long time, very, very long time ago. And of course, he's the person who popularized the notion of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So if you chopped somebody's hand off, the authorities would then chop your hand off, and if you gouged out somebody's eye, the Babylonian police force would gouge out your eye. So it was very, very much an approach based on the law of retaliation. If you committed a crime, you were not tried to be made safe. You were attacked in exactly the same way as the victim whom you did attack. So it was very, very violent times. And of course,
and the notion that that society should retaliate or against violence for violence, really, we have that today as well. I mean, that has not totally gone away.
We do. It's just been, today is the 21st of September, so it was literally 10 days ago, was it not, that we had the 19th anniversary of the horrific, infamous 9/11 attack. And hearing, the former American president, George W. Bush, on television, he in a way, he adopted that retaliatory mode that after New York City was attacked in such a murderous way, he said, we are going to retaliate and protect the United States of America. So I think you're absolutely right that much of world politics, much of warfare is based on that ancient Babylonian and probably pre-Babylonian notion of retaliation, what is known as the lex talionis, the law of retaliation. So it's a very deeply instantiated part of the human collective psyche, really.
Yeah.
And the question that I raise in this book is that given that we've now had over 100 years to benefit from the more humane approach of people like Sigmund Freud and Carl Gustav Jung and the thousands and hundreds of thousands now of talking therapists and listening therapists around the world, can we move to a more humanizing position of how we treat offender patients? Yes, sometimes we may have to keep them safe from harming themselves and harming others by placing them in institutions, but do they have to be beaten in these institutions? Can they be rehabilitated whilst in prison or in a maximum security unit, so we can get to the bottom of the traumatic experiences that put them there in the first place, so that when they do come out, they won't reoffend? Because, certainly in the United Kingdom, there have been different studies, but of those offenders who have been released, between 2/3 and 3/4 will then commit further offenses and then be reincarcerated because they get no psychological treatment in prison.
Yes, and of course we have, that's mostly the case here with notable exceptions. There are places where they do have some kind of psychological treatment for at least some of the people who are incarcerated there. Your book really wonderfully traces the arc from the retribution approach to a more humanized approach, and even to what you call a blue sky look into what you would hope for the future. And you really shine as a historian, I must say, because as I go through the book, and I'm struck by so many of the references go way, way back. There were not only to the 18th century BC, but also many of them are, references to the 1700s, books that were written in the 17 and 1800s, and even more in the 1900s, or the early 1900s. Many of the references come from there, so that we really get a sense of how things developed over the arc of time. And if somebody had to write a term paper or a book, where they have a chapter or they make mention, of this progression, it would be a shame if they didn't have your book close at hand, because you've done the hard work of going to I think there are special libraries in the UK that you haunted to write this book?
Absolutely. One of my great regrets being a member of the mental health profession, and I'm sure I've driven my students bonkers all the time, one of my great regrets is that our colleagues do not read enough.
Yeah.
And I think when people do read, they often, read the latest literature published in, the American Psychologist or the British Journal of Psychiatry, which is great and contains fantastic material. But we have a profession which is literally thousands of years old. And there's an immense archive of unused, unread back data that can teach us a lot about how to understand mental illness, and can also teach us a lot about what not to do, because we do have some very cruel ancestors. And I think we do have an obligation, we do have a need to study the history of psychiatry and the history of psychology more fully, so we can try to understand why our predecessors were so overwhelmed by these mad, violent patients that they did feel the need to retaliate, and they did feel the need to avoid talking about the traumatic histories. The 19th century theories of etiology were primarily what were known at the time as theories of degenerationism. So if you said to an alienist or a psychiatrist in the mid-19th century, why is your patient a dangerous lunatic? Why did he set fire to that farmhouse? They would say, well, he has a degenerated brain. Uh-huh. This is an inherited condition. There was no sense at all that patients had childhoods. And I think we in mental health should be very, very proud and very relieved that at last the whole canvas of psychopathology, the whole study of the field of madness, has been reconfigured in recent decades from a traumatological perspective.
Yes.
We now know that 90% of patients who suffer from psychosis have also suffered from sexual abuse before they became psychotic. Yeah. And that cannot be an accidental happening. So, we are getting better at unveiling, whatever the genetic contribution, if any, might be, whatever the biochemical or neuroanatomical contribution might be. And there are even people who doubt that there is any substantial contribution from the biopathological point of view. We have very, very firm data, very compelling data about the role of early sexual trauma, early developmental loss, early bereavement in the genesis of states of severe mental illness. So that's very, very novel in the history of mental health. That didn't exist a century ago, and it really was our friend Professor Freud who got the profession finally. He had to endure, as you know, a lot of resistance, a lot of suspicion,
sure,
a lot of abuse. He was called not Freud in his lifetime, but the English psychiatrist Charles Mercier used to delight in calling Freud Professor Fraud.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's not...
So Freud had to put up with a lot to say, actually, let's look at early infantile and childhood experiences. But now it's absolutely stock standard in the psychological psychotherapy communities. And the reason it has become stock standard is because our patients have led us down this direction. And when we have a quiet, non-judgmental, non-invasive session with them, they tell us the full story.
Yeah, and it's amazing that Freud started off so strongly on that theme, and in some ways I think was forced to back away from it, but time, because they thought these people talking about how they were sexually abused, that's just got to be a fantasy that they had, but modern experience has shown us that all kinds of sexual abuse is visited upon children and documented, and is much more, frequent than anybody would have thought. Well, except for Freud.
Yes, absolutely. And regrettably, the two populations which have the highest degree of survivors of sexual assaults and other types of horrific abuse are those who are incarcerated in psychiatric hospitals and those who are incarcerated in penal institutions.
Yeah. And there have been studies, I recall studies of people in prisons, and almost universally they find extremely ugly childhood experiences. That criminality doesn't just come from nowhere.
Yeah, and it would be far too simplistic to say that people who become criminals have all been sexually abused. They haven't all been sexually abused, but large numbers have. But I talk particularly in the chapter, I think the longest chapter in the book is on the psychodynamics of murder, about what we know of the childhood experiences of multiple murderers. And I talk about, the case of Joseph Callinger, who was a very, very famous American multiple murderer who in 1974 went on a killing spree. He had a psychotic delusion. He believed that God talked to him and that God told him he must kill every single man, woman, and child on the planet. That was his delusional plan, to murder us all. He killed 3 people, including one of his own children. That's 3 too many, but he was caught after his 3rd victim, so he didn't get round to the other 7 billion. But when you look into the details of his childhood, it was not a normal childhood. It was full of broken attachments. It was full of sexual abuse. And it was full of a very, very perverse form of parental cruelty. His mother told him that he had to have a hernia operation as a very, very small boy. And his mother, who was very terrified of sexuality due to her own childhood difficulties, told him that when the doctor performed a procedure on him, the doctor took all the potency out of his genitals, and that when he would grow up, he'd never be able to get a girl in trouble. In other words, she made him believe that his penis didn't function. And when he then became psychotic, he decided that he had to kill people not with a gun, not with fire, but with a phallic-looking knife, with a blade. And he only felt potent, and he could only reach orgasm when he held a long penis-like dagger in his hand.
Yeah. Wow.
So there's something about the genital shaming and the trauma of what Freud would have called castration anxiety, which we find in story after story when we do talk to serial killers, and one can find the same sorts of experiences in the childhood of people like Jeffrey Dahmer. These will be names of serial killers that will be very well known to American audiences, and really, really horrific histories, quite perverse histories. And I also make citation to the work of the wonderful American forensic psychiatrist who's been a great friend to our forensic mental health community here in the United Kingdom. I don't know if he's ever been on your program, James Gilligan, Professor James Gilligan.
No.
He's a remarkably brilliant forensic psychiatrist, was at the Harvard Medical School for many years, and I think is now must be in his retirement at New York University. He'd be a wonderful person to have on your show. And he worked for many, many years in some of America's biggest, maximum prisons, the super prisons, with really, really dangerous offenders. And when you hear Jim Gilligan talk about his cases and what are the factors that contributed to the murderous episodes of these people who would later be imprisoned, he was the first person really to foreground the role of shaming experiences. When he would interview these killers in prison, many very poorly educated, not very good at verbalizing their aggressive feelings, more likely to act them out muscularly with weapons than by putting them into words. And they would say to him time and time again, well, I killed that guy because he dissed me.
Yeah.
He made fun of me in some way. And when a man is shamed in that basic bodily way and doesn't have a very good sense of bodily self, which comes from secure attachment and loving parenting, then this becomes absolutely a trigger for the most murderous feelings to protect that person's own body.
Yes, yes.
So his work, if listeners haven't come across the work of James Gilligan, I really warmly recommend he's got several really good books, including a nice one, very short and sweet. You can get through it in one sitting, called Preventing Violence. And it really gives us a very, very, I think, insightful, very creative approach to the psychodynamics of serious forms of murder, and linked not to so-called genetic risk factors, not to even environmental risk factors over socioeconomic background, but to actual experiences of being shamed in a very profound way, which can cause immense murderous feeling.
Well, I'm going to take note of his name, and and I'll reach out to him and try to get him on the show here if I can.
Very good man and very, very clear speaker. He's come to speak to our group here in London many times, and he's much admired and much loved.
Yeah. We were talking about the term alienness, and what I learned from the book was, and tell me if I've got this right or not, I had always assumed that it referred to demon possession, being possessed by an alien being. But what I got from your book was that it was more of a sense of this person's behavior is so alien to humankind. Is that?
Well, you're right. We're both right. And
okay.
The term alienism and alienist, and if you were practicing in 1830, you would not have been known as a psychiatrist. You would have been known as an alienist. And this was because the patients that you were seeing were so alien to you as a human being. It was almost as though they were a different species. But you're right that this was based on, from earlier centuries, a notion of demonism, because these patients were thought to be so bizarre, so weird, so crazy. How could they possibly be humans? They must be possessed by aliens. And of course, the very ancient notion is that of madness. One of the first notions where we have any archaeological evidence in the history of psychiatry is back in prehistoric times, when mad people were thought to be possessed by horrific demons. And one of the first known interventions is what is called trephination. Trephination, for those who don't know, is when you take a piece of flint, a sharp-edged object, a bit like a dagger, and you place it against the patient's skull, and then you take a rock or a stone and you bash the flint into the skull and bore a hole in the cranium, essentially. And the hope was that this would let out the evil alien demons that were possessing this mad lunatic. And come to London when lockdown is over, and I'll take you on a tour of the medicine collection in our science museum in Kensington in central London, and you'll see they have some amazing skulls which had been trepanned. It's known as trepanning or trephination, where you literally bore a hole into the skull to let out these demons. So that is part of the historical background of the aliens. And now we're in a very, very different state where, however mad a patient seems to us, we do begin, those of us who practice today psychotherapeutically, we always search for their humanity and recognize their humanity. And I must tell you, David, we may have mentioned this when we did our last interview when we talked with me about coronavirus, but I've never known a time in my life when psychologists and patients have been confronting the same anxieties as we are doing now. But back in the old days, you could treat a severe alcoholic patient and feel, well, that's very sad that this person is struggling with such a horrific addiction, but it's not my problem, so I can differentiate myself from that. But now we're all suffering from this feeling of tremendous physical unsafety because we're living through a global pandemic. So in some ways, this has been one of the most touching chapters of my career, possibly the most touching chapter of my career, working with patients, because we're all trying to get through this together.
Yes. I was also struck by your portrayal of, or kind of reminding us that artists have played a role in a more humanizing kind of approach. And you refer to Charles Dickens and Victor Hugo and Shakespeare and even Alfred Hitchcock. As people who
thank you for picking up on that. Yes, I'm glad you've mentioned the artists. I mean, one of the features that is, I think, so shaming shocking and embarrassing about our ancestors in mental health, these alienists who regarded their patients as lunatics, is that sometimes the most acute observers of insanity were not the doctors, but the artists. You know, it was Charles Dickens who went into the American prisons and wrote about, when he went there on his lecture tour, and he wrote about the horrific ways in which the Americans would treat their prisoners in the mid-19th century. And he became really an activist, an advocate for social justice by saying in a very, very delicate but very blunt and honest way, look what you people are doing to these patients. Is this really wise? You know, one of the doctors who were exposing the cruelty in prisons, it was a novelist.
No, I was a novelist. Did you say?
Well, Dickens as a
novelist. Yes. Okay.
Yes. A writer of fiction. I mean, he was unusual among novelists in that he, as you know, he was very, very impassioned by all kinds of forms of social injustice. Yeah. But it wasn't the doctors who were exposing the cruelty.
Right.
It was a writer. It was the author of Great Expectations.
Yes.
And David Copperfield.
Yes, and your mention of Alfred Hitchcock really is an example of how Freudian ideas became so accepted in a certain way across the culture that Hitchcock and others is kind of widely assumed now that there's unconscious motivation and and distorted kinds of early experiences that can lead to violent outcomes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you look at Norman Bates in Hitchcock's famous film Psycho. My goodness! And if ever there were a man with so-called mother issues, he was the one.
Yeah.
He was, you know.
And it's hard to take a shower ever since without without remembering that scene. You know, something that I think is a real step back is the privatization of prisons. I don't know if that's happening there, but in this country, it seems like that is a step back into an extremely punitive attitude towards prisoners.
Have you done some programs specifically on prison mental health?
No, I don't think so.
I think it would be very, very interesting. We have a lot of colleagues here who work, full-time in prisons, and they're really championing bringing in psychotherapy because they know that the reoffending rate is so incredibly high. So they say that there's, really no point in letting people out unless you've done something to try to rehabilitate them psychologically while they are under lock and key.
And now you're reminding me that yes, I did interview a wonderful prison psychologist. I'm going to block on his name right now, but who did Jungian dream work with small groups of prisoners, and it was absolutely transformative for them.
Gosh.
Really wonderful work.
No, there's a lot that one can do. And I think by making good mental health practice available to prisoners in all countries is not only good for the prevention of future violence and for the prevention of future mental health breakdowns, but it is also the epitome of humanization that every person deserves to be listened to.
Yeah.
And, Freud wrote back in 1893 that the person who invented civilization is the first person who hurled an insult rather than a spear. In other words, if you can put your angry thoughts and emotions into words rather than actions, much better to hurl an insult at somebody than a spear.
Yeah.
You can't be sent to prison for hurling a verbal insult. that, that is what we have to do with patients who are suffused by violent emotions.
Yeah.
We have to help them to put that into words so that they're then less likely to enact that anger, that rage, that murderousness in a forensic behavioral fashion. And that's what psychotherapy is so good at, because in a way, every private psychotherapy session gives the patient an opportunity to say, I would love to kill my bitch of a mother, or I can't wait for my father to die because he's such a horrible man. That kind of expression of rage. Not that patients always have that. Most patients, as you know, have very ambivalent feelings, and there's a time when people love their mothers but also hate their mothers. And but if you put it into words, it's very, very relieving. But if it's not articulated, then it's much more likely to be enacted in a behavioral form. And that's when we move into the forensic mental health field, when patients actually commit very violent crime.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm looking at the clock, as we therapists say, and I notice that we're coming to the end of our hour. So I really, you're always so rich in your observations, and I'm so happy to have had you to help look back and on this celebration of 15 years, and also always so impressed by your writing and your work and your scholarship, and you're so determined, such a determined and careful, fastidious scholar. And you were talking about, well, people don't, you're concerned that many professionals today don't read as much as they should to understand the history. But you have to go further and realize that the impact of our technology is that most people are going to just do a Google search and leave it at that. So,
not everybody is going to get to the British Library in the way that I enjoy doing. But,
yes.
But if people do want to be scholarly, they need to listen to all 700 plus episodes of Shrink Wrap Radio, because in some ways you have really given us, David, a true library. If one listens to all these episodes, we will all have a real education. And I think that with these podcasts where you can hear the voice, you can actually get a sense of the passion that your different contributors have, which doesn't always come across from the printed text. So I think by having curated Shrink Wrap Radio in the way that you have created a library for psychological workers for generations to come. So thank you, and happy anniversary.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being once again such a wonderful guest on Shrink Wrap Radio. And